Hi, welcome to the Skeptic's Kitchen. This channel is going to be about food and reason and logic. I'm the skeptic. My name is Wesley, and this is my pre-war kitchen. I have a working vintage kitchen. All of my appliances were made during the Great Depression. So I've got a working vintage kitchen. I have a passion for cooking, particularly with historic recipes. So what we're going to do is we're going to be learning a few things at the same time. We're going to learn how to make some delicious historic dishes from the Tudor period all the way through World War II and the Depression. And we're also going to talk about issues such as feminism, social justice warriors, the alternative medicine woo community, and things like that. So let's get stuck into it. Today we're going to learn how to make a dish from 1909 from the recipe book The Reformed Cookery by Ida Mills, copyright 1909. This recipe is a vegan recipe. I'll be using butter in my recipe, so it won't be vegan, but you can use margarine and that will be vegan for you. So this is a very delicious recipe. It's a very hearty soup, and it's called a sea pie. Now when I say sea pie, you might think S-E-A-P-I-E, sea pie, which is how it's spelled in Reformed Cookery, but what it actually is C-I-P-A-I-L-L-E, sea pie. It's a French word that means any soup or stew that's cooked with a large dumpling on top of it, so when it's done, it looks like a pot pie. But it's actually a soup or stew, and you eat the dough crust that's on top of the soup along with your soup. It's delicious. This is it's an easy recipe to make. You don't need very many ingredients. It makes a large batch of soup that you can and use for a later date. You can save it and use it for a later date. It's fun to cook, and it's very healthy for you because one of the main ingredients is Marmite, concentrated feminist tears. This Marmite yeast extract, which is an English product that was introduced in 1903, and it's a yeast and vegetable extract, and it contains tons of B vitamins. This is a very, very healthy product to consume. You can either spread it on toast, thinly spread it on toast. It's got a very strong flavor. You can thinly spread it on toast. Add a little cottage cheese to the toast if you want. That makes it a better flavor. Or you can use it like I use it in making a soup stock. You can make a vegetable stock out of this. I've got about a gallon of water in this pitcher, and I've used a teaspoon and a half of Marmite to mix up a beautiful brown, aromatic soup stock that's going to be the base for our soup. So the ingredients that you're going to need, like I said, are really simple. You're going to need a turnip. You're going to need a parsnip. You're going to need a carrot. You're going to need some lentils. You're going to need a red onion. You're going to need 3 cloves of garlic. You're going to need some salt, pepper, and some seasonings. I'm using rosemary, sweet marjoram, and oregano. You're going to need some butter or margarine. And you're going to need a bag of self-rising flour. I recommend King Arthur brand flour because they've been making flour since 1790. That's a long time for a company to be in existence. So you can pretty much guarantee that they have a superior product. And King Arthur self-rising flour is just about the best self-rising flour that I've come across. And make sure that it is self-rising flour that you use. Otherwise, your dumpling on top of the soup is not going to come out right. It'll be very ugly when it comes out. The first time I ever made it, I didn't use self-rising flour, and it was disgusting. So make sure you're using self-rising flour. And well, let's get stuck into it. First thing you want to do is you want to grab your carving knife and chop up the onion. This is the easiest way to chop an onion. I'm just chopping a grid around the onion and not cutting all the way through the onion, so then I can take it, lay it on its side, and I get lovely little onion pieces that come out of it. Oh, and a note, don't hold your knife like I'm holding mine. I have a disability that's paralyzed my right thumb, and I'm right-handed, so I have to hold a knife differently than how you should be holding a knife. You really want to hold a knife the proper way. You want to get your thumb and your forward finger on the blade itself, because that gives you more control over the blade, and wrap your middle, your ring, and your index and your pinky finger around the handle, and you can get much better control over your knife chopping. But unfortunately, I'm right-handed and cannot safely chop with my left hand, so I've had to relearn how to hold a knife. So don't follow my lead by holding your knife the way that I am, because it is kind of dangerous. You know, I do run the risk of cutting myself, but I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to cut myself. And so you get your onions all chopped, and you want to chop up your garlic. Put that other piece of garlic in there. And you take your stock pot, put on a little bit of olive oil, and just get all of that stuff right on in there, and we're going to start sauteing it. We're going to sweat these onions. We're not going to caramelize them, we just want to sweat them. So you want to be on a medium flame, not a high flame, because you'll burn your onions and garlic, and that's not going to be good at all. So while these begin to saute, we'll get started on today's subject. Today I'm talking about the justice system. And we live in a country that has, in the Western world, we're living in countries that have two parallel justice systems that are incompatible with one another. We have a criminal justice system and we have a social justice system, and they are fully incompatible with one another. Now, we all pretty much have a basic idea of how the criminal justice system works, but I'll try and break it down for you for the sake of my argument. You're either arrested or otherwise accused of committing a crime. You are either taken to jail or issued a summons for your court trial, such as in a ticket. A traffic ticket is a form of summons to a court trial. You're presumed to be innocent of the crime until a trial can prove you guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. You are guaranteed a speedy trial, even though it doesn't always come out like that. You have the right to face your accuser in open court. The trial is conducted by an adversarial system of cross-examination debate. The judgment of guilt or innocence is determined by either a jury of your peers or a judge, and sentencing is then rendered, either removing you from society for a period of months or years, the rest of your life, or in extreme cases, death. Now, this adversarial system is not perfect, and we as a society have been tweaking this system, improving upon it and perfecting it over the course of the last several thousand years. Corruption still leaks through, and it is sometimes a painfully slow process, even if we are guaranteed a speedy trial. But the system can only move as fast as its backlog will allow it. Remember, the criminal justice system was first implemented when our population on this planet was not 6.5 billion. So there's a lot more people who are being accused of crimes now than there were in 1789. So trials will move a lot more slowly these days than they did in 1789. Now, I find this system to be basically fair, and generally, except in cases of minor drug offenses, the punishment fits the crime. Most of the time. We're still working on it. But there's also a parallel justice system operating in the Western world, which is very much a system, but rarely just. I'm talking about the social justice system. What do I mean by social justice system? I'm talking about the mechanisms by which social justice warriors enforce their ideology upon groups of people. In other words, how they shit up every movement and community they infiltrate. They have two primary enforcement mechanisms, mobbing and shunning. Both are poisonous and extremely detrimental to the group psychology and cohesion, as well as sometimes causing irreparable harm to individuals who have been targeted by mobbing and shunning. First, we're going to look at mobbing. According to Wikipedia, Mobbing is defined as the bullying of an individual by a group in any context, such as family, friends, peers, school, workplace, neighborhood, community, or online. When it occurs as emotional abuse in a group or workplace, such as ganging up by peers or coworkers, subordinates, or superiors to force someone out of the group or workplace through rumor, innuendo, intimidation, humiliation, discrediting, and isolation. It is also referred to as malicious, non-sexual, non-racial general harassment. Let's check our onions, see how they're doing. Oh yeah, color's coming out on them really nice. Lower that heat a little bit. Now, victims of mobbing suffer frequently from adjustment disorders, somatic symptoms such as headaches or irritable bowel syndrome, psychological trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, and major depression. In Mobbing Targets with PTSD, psychologist Heinz Lehmann notes that, quote, the mental effects were fully comparable with PTSD from war or prison camp experiences. Some patients may develop alcoholism or other substance abuse disorders. Family relationships routinely suffer. Some targets may even develop brief psychotic episodes, generally with paranoid symptoms, unquote. Lehmann estimated that 15% of suicides in Sweden could be directly attributed to workplace mobbing. That's atrocious. Mobbing occurs in many different types of social scenarios, social justice warriors being only one among many. Research into mobbing and its psychological effects on the target have been studied since the 1960s. As mobbing becomes more widely known and deplored, it is to be expected that many people in academia, as in other fields, will claim to be mobbed as a way of warding off criticism and strengthening their position in office or petty group politics. Think of Anita Sarkeesian, Melody Hensley and her PTSD induced by Twitter, P.Z. Myers and Rebecca Watson within the Atheism Plus community, none of whom are or were actually being mobbed. Indeed, many people will genuinely feel that they're being mobbed and will thereby attribute a lack of sympathy from others as proof that the others are part of the mob. It is therefore essential that any claimed or apparent case of mobbing be subjected to hard-nosed scrutiny and skepticism in light of empirical indicators, measurable criteria by which to conclude that yes, this is a case of mobbing, or no, it is not. Here is a checklist of 16 indicators or measures that Kenneth Westhughes used in his research and offered on workshop handouts entitled WAMI, the Waterloo Anti-Mobbing Instruments. In the introduction to Westhughes' 2006 book, The Prevention and Remedy of Mobbing in Higher Education, he applies these 16 indicators systematically to 2 different mobbing cases to illustrate variations on common themes. And there is nothing sacred about this list. Let's check our onions again. Ooh, fire went off. You want to help booger head? Okay, down to the checklist. 1. By standard criteria or job or in-group performance, the target is at least average, probably above average. 2. Rumors and gossip circulate about the target's misdeeds. Did you hear what he or she said or did? This is what happened to Michael Shermer. 3. The target is not invited to meetings or voted onto committees. They are either excluded or they exclude themselves. Number 4. A collective focus on a critical incident that shows what kind of a man he really is. The entire Michael Shermer incident comes to mind here, Shermergate. Number 5, a shared conviction that the target needs some kind of formal punishment to be taught a lesson or to check their privilege. Number 6, an unusual timing of the decision to punish, for example, apart from regular group meetings or performance review. Number 7, emotion-laden, defamatory rhetoric about the target in oral and written communications. Elevator-gate, Shermer-gate, Gamer-gate. Number 8, formal expressions of collective negative sentiment towards the target, as for example a vote of censure, signatures on a petition, or a meeting to discuss what to do about the target. Number 9, high value on secrecy, confidentiality, and collegial solidarity among the mobbers. The anonymous rape accuser of Michael Shermer. Number 10, loss of diversity of argument so that it becomes dangerous to speak up for or defend the target. Free thought blogs and Atheism Plus is censoring and banning practices. It became impossible for somebody to speak up for Thunderfoot or Matt Dillahunty when they got banned from free thought blogs, because that person who spoke up for them would be then banned from free thought blogs. Number 11, the adding up of targets' real or imagined venial sins to make a mortal sin that cries for action. Number 12, the target is seen as personally abhorrent with no redeeming qualities. Stigmatizing exclusionary labels are applied: misogynist, rape apologist, rape enabler, chill girl, sister punisher, things like that. Number 13, disregard of established procedures as mobbers take matters into their own hands. Shermergate. P.Z. Myers acted as sole judge and arbiter of Shermer's guilt, egged on by a bunch of sycophantic yes-men who openly referred to Shermer as a known rapist, despite the fact that there was no empirical evidence that a rape occurred beyond an anonymous accusation delivered by a third party. Number 14, resistance to independent outside review of sanctions imposed on the target. Number 15, outraged response to any appeals for outside help that the target may make. Number 16, mobbers' fear of violence from the target, or the target's fear of violence from the mobbers, or both. Now I can just hear a social justice warrior crying out, but doesn't this apply to Anita Sarkeesian and Melody Hensley? What about Melody's Twitter PTSD? Now if you go through that list again, you will see that none of the criteria are met to be able to determine that Anita or Melody or Rebecca Watson are or were being mobbed. Troll, yes. But it was not an organized effort. There is no organized mob of people that are intentionally going out to, as a group, troll Anita Sarkeesian or Melody Hensley. That trolling is done by individuals who happen to be displeased with either their existence or their position on things. They're all pretending, they have a habit of using criteria number 9, high value on secrecy, confidentiality, and collegial solidarity among the mobbers, inasmuch as they disable all comments on their blogs and YouTube videos every single time, and the only dissent heard about them are in other mediums such as Reddit, Facebook, or other YouTube videos critical of Sarkeesian and Hensley, which means when you watch Sarkeesian's videos, when you watch Rebecca Watson's videos, you don't see any dissent to their opinions. They're in their own little world. They're all pretending to live in a secret bubble that protects their delicate little lady parts from all the misogynistic menfolk who all want to rape them. Now, let's give another. Now, once your onions are sweated out, you can add your stock. Now I'm only adding half the stock right now because I still have some vegetables to chop, and we need to see how far up the pot they're going to come so we can keep them just covered with the broth. Now, Sarkeesian, Hensley, Rebecca Watson, Jennifer McCright, rhymes with wrong, Ophelia Benson, P.Z. Myers, Richard Carrier, these are all people who have actively called for mobbing tactics to be used against anyone who isn't with us, as Richard Carrier put it in his famous "You're either with us or you're with the misogynist" speech. They've also openly called for the second enforcement mechanism of the social justice system, shunning. Scientologists call it disconnection and declare opponents suppressive persons, and members are ordered to disconnect from the SP. Jehovah's Witnesses call it disfellowshipping. The Amish call it Maidum. However it is referred to, it is still the same basic idea. Shunning is an act of social rejection, emotional distance. In a religious context, shunning is a formal decision by a denomination or congregation to cease interaction with an individual or group and follows a particular set of rules. It differs from, but may be associated with, Catholic excommunication. want to get our carrots and our potatoes in first, because carrots and potatoes take a little bit longer to cook than parsnips and turnips and cabbage. We want everything to be done at the same time. We don't want anything overdone, because overcooking a soup like this turns it to mush, and you still want your nice juicy pieces of root vegetables in there. And I'm just cutting these potatoes down the center, and down again, and putting them into nice chunky cubes. This should be a chunky soup. This should be a soup with heartiness. You don't want to have small pieces of vegetables. You want to have a nice chunk of veggies that are just going to melt in your mouth. And now, social rejection occurs when a person or a group deliberately avoids association with and habitually keeps away from an individual or group. This can be a formal decision by a group or a less formal group action which will spread to all members of the group as a form of solidarity. It is a sanction against association, often associated with religious groups and tightly knit organizations such as anarchism or social justice groups, and communities such as Atheism Plus. Targets of shunning can include persons who have been labeled as apostates, whistleblowers, dissidents, strike breakers, rape enablers, rape apologists, phallocentric gay, transphobic, or anyone the group perceives as a threat or source of conflict. Social rejection has been established to cause psychological damage and has been categorized as torture in both UN and US law. Shunning is often used as a pejorative term to describe any organizationally mandated disassociation and has acquired a connotation of abuse and relational aggression. This is due to the sometimes extreme damage caused by its disruption to normal relationships between individuals, such as friendships and family relations. Disruption of established relationships certainly causes pain, which is at least an unintended consequence of the practices described here, though it may also in many cases be an intended coercive consequence. This pain, especially when seen as unjustly inflicted, can have secondary general psychological effects on self-worth and self-confidence, trust and trustworthiness, and can, as with other types of trauma, impair psychological function. PTSD is not unheard of in cases of shunning. Shunning often includes implicit or explicit shame for a member who commits acts as seen wrong by the group. By the group or its leadership. Such shame may not be psychologically damaging if the membership is voluntary and the rules of behavior were clear before the person joined, but if the rules are arbitrary, such as in social justice warriordom and feminism, the group membership is seen as essential or for personal security, safety, or health, such as in feminism, or if the application of the rules is inconsistent, such as in feminism, such shame can be highly destructive. This is especially damaging if the perceptions are attacked or controlled, or various tools of psychological pressure applied. Extremes of this cross over the line into psychological torture and can be permanently scarring. And I think that social justice warriors frequently cross the line into psychological torture gleefully and willingly, with the self-righteous smugness radiating throughout the room. It's ugly. It's really ugly. How many people must have been shunned out of atheism because they couldn't get on board with the radical leftist politics and cultural Marxism? We know Thunderfoot was shunned out of the atheist convention community because of his positions on feminism, and Matt Dillahunty from the Atheist Experience was banned from Free Thought blogs because he caused a minor conflict with him. And how many people must have been shunned out because they couldn't get on board with radical leftist politics and cultural Marxism? Now, psychologist Kipling Williams from Purdue University has studied shunning or ostracism for decades and has created a game of cyberball in which research participants sit at a computer and toss a ball back and forth with unknown players. When the ball is no longer tossed to them, they can no longer interact with the unknown players, and the results have been remarkably consistent. Within minutes of being excluded from the game. Feelings of control, belonging, self-esteem, and meaningful existence are reduced. This sense of loss holds true against all personality types and is even found when participants know that it is a computer they are playing against and not a real person. The people who are ostracized may not initially realize what's happening, only having a vague sense that something is wrong. Maybe people are mad at them and they're often unsure of their perceptions and wonder if they're imagining it, but once it is undeniable that they're being shunned, their pain first intensifies, then turns into anger and rage. People feel rage when they have lost all sense of control, and no one will intervene to help them, while going to great lengths to keep the person excluded and deprived of control. Moreover, the human need for inclusion and recognition is so great that when a person has lost all sense of control over their social environment through shunning, they may resort to antisocial acts of aggression just to regain it. This part's a bit fiddly. Now we've got almost all of our ingredients in. We're going to bring this up to high, put it onto a boil. Now, targets of mobbing and shunning will know that a person need not be obstructive or burdensome to feel the full force of shunning. Indeed, I would argue that most workplace or group shunning is aimed not at the person who's been the most disruptive or aggressive, but the person who has most displeased management or leaders within the group, often for valid reasons, such as reporting misconduct or expressing an unpopular view. In these cases, the normal response of the target to feel anguish followed by anger may lead otherwise peaceful and mentally stable people to appear anything but peaceful or mentally stable. Indeed, shunning is a form of crazy-making which so damages the target that it can take years to recover and rebuild a social and professional life. Now it's time to add a little bit more stock. And now it's time to add the spices. You want a pinch of salt, pinch of pepper, rosemary. We're just going to put the rest of it in here and dump it all at the same time. Your sweet marjoram. It gives a really nice after flavor to the soup. Real mild. And your oregano. Stir it up, make sure everything is submerged. And then add your lentils. Lentils you don't need to soak overnight, you can just put them right in and they'll be fine. Those Mobbing and shunning, those are the enforcement mechanisms of the social justice system. Now, have any of you watching ever felt shunned by your peers or coworkers? I've been shunned out of 2 different cities, Tucson, Arizona, and Portland, Oregon. Both times I had the label of misogynist, ageist, and others applied to me by the anarchist groups I was working with, all for simply daring to speak at all when there was a woman at the table. And I had even been privilege checked by a feminist who actually claimed that I was gay only because I hated women so much that I would never lower myself to sleep with one. Yeah. That's why I'm gay. That's exactly it. She hit the nail on the head. I'm gay because I hate women. Third wave feminism has infiltrated many different groups over the last couple of decades, including anti-feminism within the anarchist community. That's where I fell in. Code Pink feminists within the general social justice community, and they infiltrated environmental movements with green feminism, Occupy, atheism, and most recently, gaming. I went through my period of anarchism, but I had to rethink my political philosophies after I became an atheist, and anarchism and feminism did not hold up rationally from the skeptic's perspective. The people who are movers and shakers within the mobbing and shunning social justice warriordom are quite simply horrible, horrible people. If I believed in good or evil, I would definitely say that they were evil people. They get into everything and immediately shit it all up with their hateful, angry vitriol. They're like rats. They get into everything. Something that targets of shunning need to remember is no matter how awful it is, there's always something to look forward to, and that is the world beyond the ostracizers. Make no mistake, shunning is not a noble act. It is an act of aggression and can be every bit as damaging, if not deadly, to the person who is targeted. And it damages those who engage in shunning because the longer they maintain it, the harder it is to end it. So if you've been a member of the crowd shunning a person who failed to please your leader, rethink your non-actions and reach out to the person you've erased and are so painfully hurting. And if you are a person who has been shunned, don't turn to your ostracizers for approval. Move on to a kinder, gentler environment where you are valued and treated with the humanity that you deserve. Now we're going to get on to making the dumpling. The dumpling is easy. This is one of the easiest pastry recipes you can possibly have. You're going to need 5 tablespoons of self-rising flour, heaping tablespoons, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need a fork. Fork the flour a little bit to separate the chunks. Gives it kind of a little sifting. And then the recipe calls for a piece of butter the size of an egg. Now that can be kind of difficult, but it's about 2 tablespoons, 3 tablespoons of butter. That's about the size, a little bit more. That's about the size of an egg. Stir it up. Get the butter all worked in there, and we're going to add a little bit of water to it to make it a nice stiff dough. You just keep adding a little bit of water at a time, just a splash of water at a time, until you get it into a nice stiff dough that holds itself together. sticky. And if you make it over sticky, if you put too much water in, then you can add a little bit of flour and put the flour in. Which is what I need to do. Now I'm getting a dough ball. You want it to be a stiff ball. There we go. You want it to be a nice stiff ball that moves around with the fork as you move it around. You want it to kind of hold its shape, be nice and thick. Get this crap off my hands. You know, the hardest part about this, being shunned, is moving on to a different environment. I've had to do that a couple times, and it's hard. New town, new friends, new social circles. I don't want atheism to be something that I have to move on from because it's been shit up by social justice warriors. I'm quite happy being an atheist and a non-feminist, and I don't think there should be political labels applied to my belief system, and I think it to be cruel and unusual punishment to be exiled from atheist conferences and the greater atheist community simply because you won't get on the man-hating, white-hating, straight-hating, privilege-checking bandwagon. I've never been to an atheist conference, but the political climate of those is so fucked up that I don't think I want to spend the several $100s it would cost me to attend a conference to be talked down to by a bunch of misandrists and told that I am the scum of the earth. Rebecca Watson even called me and a crap ton of other atheists worse than rape threats because we didn't get on board. Now, why should I attend a conference when that kind of rhetoric is what spews out of their mouths? I had enough money to attend the Atheist Bat Cruise in Austin, Texas last year, but Richard Carrier was the keynote speaker, and I already know what he's going to talk about, and I don't want to be spoken to in the manner by which he addresses his audience and male atheists in general. I deserve more respect than he's willing to give me or anyone else not fully drunk on the social justice Kool-Aid. Let's check our soup again. Oh, it's beginning to boil. That's excellent. Let's give this stir. This is still a little too sticky. The dough needs a little bit more flour. You want the dough to hold together but not be so sticky that it falls completely apart. You want it about the consistency of bread dough. Flour your board a little bit, and then you pat this dough ball out Get it all conglomerated, and you pat this dough ball out. Kind of knead it a little bit. Get that gluten stretched. You want to pat it out. If you've got a rolling pin, I don't have a rolling pin, so I'm having to shape it by hand. But you want to shape this dough that you're making. You want to shape it into the same size as the top of your pot, because you're going to cover over. You're setting this on top of the soup, and it's going to hold the steam in, except for a small hole that you punch in the middle. And it's going to sit there and cook on top of this and turn this into a just delicious stew. Now once it's up to a boil, you can bring the heat back down to a medium, get it to a simmer, not a rolling boil, and keep patting out your dough until it's the size that you need it to be. Very carefully pick it up and just lay it on top. Then take a lid, and in 45 minutes, we'll have a delicious soup. Now, this infestation of social justice warriors, third and fourth wave feminists, has got to stop. These people are selfish individuals who feel entitled to everything with special treatment because racism, because misogyny, because their suffering trumps everyone else's. Their first world problems are worse than female genital mutilation. These are horrible, horrible, horrible people. They're petty, willfully ignorant, judgmental, and backstabbing. Now I know so many people who have been mobbed and shunned by social justice warriors. People like me who used to be social justice warriors until we were mobbed and shunned out of the community and had our lives and social reputations rent completely asunder. It's a very isolating feeling. Will atheism ever recover from Atheism Plus? Will gaming forever be ruined by feminism? I don't know the answers to these questions. But what I do know is that these feminists are ruining life for many people. They need to be stood up to, and they need to be called out for their selfish individualism, both by mockery and by rational argument. They need to be come at from two different directions. And I think it's very important. Everybody who makes a video calling out feminists and social justice warriors on their bullshit is doing a good deed. And everybody who is taking part in those practices are brave people, because it takes a lot of courage to go up against third and fourth wave feminism, because that is a big ball of crazy, and it takes a lot to go up against crazy. And yeah. So in 45 minutes, the soup will be done, and we'll take a look at it. And we'll go from there. I'll see you in 45 minutes. All right, it's been 45 minutes and the sea pie is done. It looks delicious. I'm going to bring the camera over so you can see what it looks like. Yeah, look at that. That's a delicious sea pie. You just cut that dough into pie slices, and then you serve the pie slices on top of the soup, and it's delicious. We're going to take out a bowl of it right now. There. Doesn't that look delicious? That looks good. That's going to be some good dinner. So there's your sea pie, and there's how the social justice system and the mechanism of social justice works. little story of the last time I got shunned. I was working with an anarchist collective here in the city I live in now. I'm in Toledo, Ohio. And we had bought this building that we were going to turn into an info shop and community center. And it was an old commercial building, about 10,000 square feet with 2 floors and an old broken down freight elevator that was rusted solid. And the feminist contingent wanted to use that elevator to ferry handicapped people from the first floor to the second floor, or from the first floor to the basement, or wherever. They wanted to use this broken down freight elevator that was rusted solid as a handicapped elevator. Now, it's illegal to use a freight elevator for human transport. I already knew this because I had a little bit of understanding of the law. And I pointed out that we would have to replace the entire elevator at a cost of about $35,000 to make a handicapped accessible elevator capable of ferrying people between a basement, a first floor, and a second floor. And I was privilege checked and said that that's not true. What I was saying wasn't true, that people used freight elevators for handicapped access all the time. That's not true. She was making it up as she went along. And the next meeting that we had, she brought on a handout that basically went through a whole checklist of things that is mansplaining, and how male privilege disrupts women's voices in meetings, and women should speak first at a meeting, not the men, and that I was informed that I talked too much and needed to be quiet while at these meetings so we could let the women hash out the deal with the elevator. And so I called the elevator inspector, and I had the elevator inspector come all the way up from Columbus, Ohio. It's like a 3.5-hour drive. Come all the way up from Columbus, Ohio, to look at our elevator and tell us what we would need to do to make it be a handicapped accessible elevator. And he said there's no way that we could make that elevator a handicapped accessible elevator. And he gave us a $250 fine for opening the doors of the elevator, because the elevator had been sealed by the elevator inspector when the building was sold. We opened the elevator up to check it out, and he gave us a fine for opening it up. It's $250. And I was blamed for that. I was told that I was a misogynist and I was ableist by not wanting to make the space handicapped accessible. Even though I suggested the much cheaper alternative of stair lifts as opposed to an elevator. If you could put someone on a stair lift to get up to the second floor down into the basement, that would cost about 25% of what installing a whole elevator would cost. And I was later on lynched by the entire group and mobbed, by the entire group, and told that I was disruptive and that I talked too much and that I was a sexist who didn't let women speak. And I was then kicked out of the info shop in the middle of winter. I had to move into my truck. And I lived in my truck for 3 months during the winter of 2010. And that was a really ugly scene. And I still think back to those days quite frequently, and it still bothers me. But I'm not involved with those people anymore. I've been shunned out of that group, and I'm excluded from certain places where those people hang out, and I can't participate in local politics anymore because they're the local political group. So I found another group of people to hang out with, and that's my circle of friends today, and we're interested in historic preservation. I've always been a historian, and I have a good circle of friends now. I got away from those awful people and woke up to how horrible of human beings they actually were. And that was the first steps I started to take away from anarchism and away from belief in God. Over that next winter and spring, I became an atheist, realized that belief in God was foolish. None of my prayers had ever been answered. And that anarchism was foolish because it was an unworkable system that used horrible tactics to enforce ideology within their circles, and that was really ugly. They're really ugly people, and I'm glad that I'm away from them. So if you're surrounded by those kind of people, if you're having to interact with those kind of people, I say run for the hills. Get as far away from them as you possibly can, because they are pieces of shit. They are shitty human beings, and they will do nothing but shit up your life and make it miserable. So yeah, that's my last experience with shunning. I've had a few experiences with shunning, including the 2 cities I've been shunned out of. And yeah, I'm not political anymore. I'm not an openly political person anymore. I don't go to rallies, I don't go to protests, I don't feel like protesting, and I certainly don't see all the problems with our society that these social justice warriors claim exist. I took a rational look at that and realized it was silliness. The entire idea of people being oppressed in a first world country is ridiculous. We live in the most, I own this house. This house that I'm filming in right now, I own. I'm probably one of the more privileged persons in the world right now because I live in America and I own my own home, and that makes me privileged. Even though I only make $733 a month on disability because of my thumb and post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of my military experience, I'm still very privileged. I recognize that, and I don't see the oppression that these people talk about all the time, because that's all they seem to do is talk about oppression while never giving you any indication of how to combat that oppression. It's just oppression exists, and we need to do something about it. And so we need to go protest and rally, and we need to make people feel like shit because feelings. And let's try a big bite of this. Looks like it's cooled off a little bit. Get some of this dough in here. Come here, Carrot. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that's earthy. It's earthy, it's hearty, it's filling. It's a great soup. You can dress this soup up with, you can use beef stock instead of Marmite stock. You can use cubed beef. I would recommend top sirloin, cubed, and browned before you put it in with the soup. You can use chicken. I recommend boneless, skinless chicken breast to be the chicken. You can use chicken stock if you're using chicken. You can use beef stock if you're using beef cubes, or you can use Marmite or just plain vegetable stock if you don't like Marmite. Some people don't like Marmite, you can use vegetable stock instead of a Marmite stock. And on the subject of Marmite, us here in America, we don't know a lot about Marmite. It's a British product. But like I said, I live in Toledo, Ohio, and I can buy Marmite at my local grocery store in the international foods aisle, where it has a section on British foods where you'll find Marmite, Lyle's Golden Syrup, Treacle Tarts, and HP sauce, all of these great British products. And so if I can find it in a Rust Belt hellhole of dilapidation, which is Toledo, Ohio, then I'm sure you can find Marmite at your local grocery store as well. They sell it in the little jars. They don't sell the big jars here. You got to get the big jars online, but they sell the small jars of Marmite, the little 8-ounce jars, and it's delicious. I love it. I put Marmite on toast. I eat Marmite like an Englishman. I think it makes the best vegetable stock. I think it's better than vegetable stock, and it certainly has more vitamins and minerals in it than plain vegetable stock does. So it makes it extra healthy for you if you do choose to use the Marmite. But this is the Sea Pie, and that was social justice. Next video, we're going to be talking about white privilege and male privilege, and we're going to bake a delicious loaf of Amish white bread. And that video is going to be aimed at TJ, the Amazing Atheist, because he says he cannot bake bread and does not know how to bake bread. And I think everybody should know how to bake bread. I bake all my own bread. And that should be next week. So thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this culinary experience. I hope you enjoyed the sharing of ideas that we did. And I'll see you next week. Thanks. Ciao.